let's go over my top 5 books of the year. I've got the list divided into 2 parts, my top 3 nonfiction, and then my top really 2 sets of fiction. So let's jump right into it. The first book that we'll talk about, no particular order about these, okay? They're just, and by favorite, maybe it would be important for me to clarify for you. These are the ones that had the most impact on me, at least perceptively. I don't really know necessarily. Can't measure which book had the biggest impact on me. But from my perspective, as far as human penmen go, these are the books that had the most impact on me that I read in the past year after reading well over 40 books. I said 39 in the last video, but I actually have another video coming out where I go through 7 more books that I forgot. So the first book on this list, favorite, is Ploductivity. So Ploductivity is a book by Douglas Wilson that looks at technology and how technology is a tool, which is really a form of wealth, and how we ought to steward it in our lives. So for example, most everyone has a smartphone. And the capability of the modern smartphone is the equivalent of 1,000 servants of somebody amongst the aristocrats, 500 years ago. So we have at our fingertips thousands of different servants who can go fetch us things, fetch us information, fetch us solutions to problems, fetch us something to eat, okay? We've got all these at our fingertips with this phone. And so he looks at technology then as a form of wealth to be stewarded. And in it, he looks at how tools are really something that makes us who we are. That is, we uniquely reflect God by utilizing tools. And by that I mean, think about the original mandate given to man in the Garden of Eden. He was to dress it and to keep it. And Doug Wilson would argue then that it's implied that man would be a tool maker and a tool user. And so he looks at tools like technology as being something that's part of being human. And the challenge then is to use them rightly, to steward them correctly. And he cautions people against loving tools or against being fearful of the tools. And let me illustrate that for you. A hammer can be used to build a brothel, and it can be used to build a barn, right? One thing that's on its face bad, right? A brothel. One place that on its face is good, a barn. And when one uses a hammer to build one or the other, we don't locate the sin of that construction, brothel or barn, in the object. We don't look at the hammer and say, the hammer is sin because it was used to build a brothel. Well, no, the heart may wield the hammer to build a brothel, and certainly that is sinful. But the heart which held the hammer to build the barn to serve their father and mother, or to serve their neighbor, or to serve their God, well, that's good. And so he argues that technology and any of its iterations, that technology is a tool to be stewarded. It ought not to be loved for its own sake, nor ought it to be feared as something that's sinful. People who are technophobic, usually, people or families that are technophobic, it's usually not about every piece of technology. For example, they own a car, have AC or heat or air, maybe a roof with shingles. All of these things were made by men who use tools to accomplish those specific ends. And so all of that technology doesn't have to be electronic. All of that technology you're the inheritor of and the benefactor of. And it's not evil just because it's the next newest kind of technology. Nor is every single kind of technology to be loved as if there's no misusing it. He would caution against technology's misuse while at the same time encouraging its appropriate use. And so that's why it's good. So it helped me because I was definitely leaning way more toward the technophobic side. Not that I would have located sin in any of the particular objects, but that I was fearful. And I think he's fine with you being cautiously skeptical of certain kinds of technology, right? But to make sure, and this is a Christian distinctive, like high orthodoxy in the Christian tradition would say stuff isn't sinful. You can't locate sin in stuff or in matter, like in the hammer, in the internet. The internet can be used for evil, but that doesn't make it evil. The hearts of men are evil, who use things to accomplish their evil ends. So if that sounds interesting to you, it's about technology, using it rightly, and plodding or eating an elephant one bite at a time. Okay? And so that's Ploductivity by Doug Wilson, one of my favorite books from the year. The next one that we're going to talk about is Steven Pressfield's The War of Art. And so this goes for any type of creative person, whether they're an illustrator, an artist. It could be really a parent who's trying to craft a child for the glory of God. It even applies to something like that. It applies to someone who's creating a business, someone who's creating a team. And what the book is about is Steven Pressfield looks at those things, that force, which comes against us whenever we try to embark on that type of difficult creative endeavor. And he identifies it and names that force resistance. As Christians, we would look at it and say, well, we have three enemies, the world, the systems of the world, the flesh, or the principle of sin which dwells inside of us that we must mortify and put to death. And so we've got the world, the flesh, and the devil, which represents the spiritual dimension of real spirit beings which exist outside of matter. So we understand as Christians, really, we do face resistance. And we can put faces, so to speak, not our neighbors, but we can put faces, so to speak, on that resistance. In the book, he just personifies the force as resistance and defines what resistance is, how it's a liar, how it'll try and get you to procrastinate, and then how to overcome it. So, for example, if I sit down to make a video, I will encounter resistance, right? What'll come into my head is, oh, I've got to move that light. Oh, I've got to change my outfit. Oh, I've got to look in the mirror again. Oh, I've got to do this. Oh, I would really like a sandwich. You know, any host or multitude of things can come into your mind. And what Steven Pressfield wants to remind you is say, listen, all of that is a bunch of balderdash, and it's resistance trying to get you to stop from being productive or from producing something good, from being a creator, from being a producer, and just to remain a consumer, remain passive, and stay away from being active. So he is all about helping you see the enemy as resistance and then overcome it. That's the first half of the book. The second half of the book is delineating or illustrating the differences between the novice and the professional. And he doesn't identify the professional as the one who does a certain trade or task for money, but he defines the professional as the one who does the work, the one who regularly does the work. The amateur sits down to write their novel whenever they feel like it, when they're in the mood. Excuse me. Can I take a drink? We got coffee, not a sponsor. I have a sore throat. Okay, so the amateur and the professional. So the amateur shows up to do the work whenever they have scheduled. So the professional, 10 o'clock rolls around, the professional author sits down and they say, I'm going to write. I'm going to write 2 bad pages if that's what it takes, but I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write. The novice or the amateur is the one who says, I'm going to write when the mood strikes me. When I get the perfect set of time, a week or 2 weeks clear, that's when I'll visit it. And Doug Wilson talks about that being a terrible idea as well, okay? And that's why he likes the idea of plodding. doing little bits at a time when you can, but doing it regularly and at those regular intervals, making real, impactful changes just due to your intentionality in pursuing it regularly. So, the War of Art, first half, identifying and defining resistance, how it's a liar, a cheat, wants to get you to put it off. Here's one of the things he says about laziness. He says, the most pernicious, that is the most seductive, seditious, and deceitful, the most pernicious aspect of procrastination is that it can become a habit. We don't just put off our lives today. We put them off till our deathbed. Think of that. Is that you? Are you putting something off? I don't know. But what he cautions you against is, well, how long are you putting it off for? Right? We don't just put it off today or tomorrow. You put off life until life is gone. So it's not a Christian book. Steven Pressfield's not a Christian. But this book, really, you can see the echoes of Christian truth in this book. And I really liked it. It helped me see that really the excuses that I have for not doing certain things are just a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of garbage, and that they're lies just to get me to remain passive rather than being active, to being a consumer rather than to being a producer, to avoid being a maker and creator like our God is. The final book, no, not the final book. The next book, number 3 out of 5, is Notes from a Tilt-a-whirl by N.D. Wilson. And if you saw my top books from the year, I actually left 7 books out of that list, so I'm going to have to make another video of the books that I forgot. But in that, I described this book, and I can't really do any better of it here. It's like Nate lets you climb inside of his head and see the world through his eyes. And it's sort of like he's got attention deficit disorder, because you'll be walking and he'll notice something, he'll comment on it, and then he'll just walk away and talk about something else. And then he'll notice something else, and then he'll talk about it, and then he'll move on to something. It's all one theme, and that it really is captured very well in the subtitle, Wide-Eyed Wonder in God's Spoken World. Okay, and you can see that in his book. He's just fascinated by different things that he sees, and he wants you to see the magic or the amazing, the incredible nature, really, of the things which your eyes do behold. So here's an example in the opening chapter that's called Welcome. He describes a little bit this world that we live in, but he does it through really the lens that he sees it through. He says, just to be clear, I live on a near perfect sphere hurtling through space around 67,000 miles per hour, Mach 86 to pilots. Of course, this sphere of mine is also spinning while it hurtles, so I tack on an extra 1,000 miles per hour at the fat parts. And it's all tucked into this giant hurricane of stars. Yes, it can be freaky. Once a month or so, my wife can find me lying in the lawn, burrowing white knuckles into the grass, trying not to fly away. But most of the time, I manage to keep my balance despite the speed, and I don't have to hold on with anything more than my toes. You live here too, which means I'm not special. We're all carnies, because he's likening the world to a carnival. We're all carnies, though some people are in denial. They want to be above it all, above the mayhem of laughter and people and lights and animals, and the dark sadness that lurks in the corners and beneath the riches and in the trailers after hours. So they ride the Ferris wheel, and at the top they think they've left it all behind. They've ascended to a place where they can take things seriously, where they can be taken seriously. Let them have their moment. You and I can eat our corn dogs and wait and smile. Solomon smiles with us. The wheel turns. The earth spins and runs its laps. We all go around. And that's really that is how the whole book is. So if that piqued your curiosity and sounded like interesting to you, the whole book is like that. And Just here's to be of note, I guess, of interest. So here's my notes from Ploductivity, okay, which is quite a few notes considering the book is like 3.5 pages long, okay? But this book, I have 3 notes, okay? And I don't really know why that is, other than I just read the book and enjoyed it. And it really opened my eyes to see the wonder of the world that we live in. So, for example, we live in a world where caterpillars, Nate likes to tell this story, where caterpillars really do turn into butterflies. And in order to do it, they melt. Now, I talked to my kids the other day and I was like, hey, did you know caterpillars melt to turn into butterflies? They're like, no, they don't melt. And I was like, they go up in that chrysalis and they melt. And they're like, no. And my wife's like, no, they really do. Because caterpillars dissolve in the chrysalis and out from that soup comes a butterfly. That's amazing. That's the type of thing that's going on with Notes from a Tilt-a-whirl. Pointing out not just amazing facts about creation, but there's, for example, a section where he focuses on God's lavish, overabundant creative power that seems almost wasted, that's on display in a snowstorm. How is that, you say? Because every single snowflake is unique, and here there's thousands of them, millions of them in a single blizzard, in a single snowstorm. And yet every single one of them is unique. And so we see God sort of creative wastefully, but it's not wasted to God. Every single snowflake is unique. It's different. And that's sort of the type of thing then that Nate's after, is seeing God's goodness in the created world like that. Last 2 books, which are really sets of books for the year. And that is, the first one is C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia. Now, this obviously is a set of books for children, but I didn't read them as a child, okay? My upbringing wasn't one where, at all, I was encouraged to read the great classics of the Christian world, okay? I didn't have that kind of religious upbringing. So I read these as an adult, read them through the first time this year. I think the first 2, that is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian, I read in a previous year, but this year read the final 5 all through with my family, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. My favorite one from the series, I don't necessarily know why. I might know why. Well, I like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But probably The Silver Chair was my personal favorite. And I think it's because when they're, I don't want to necessarily spoil it. It's because of what happens in a certain castle that they find themselves in. And I remember as I read it, I was like, this is terrifying. This is terrifying what goes on here in this place. So if you've read The Silver Chair, you know what I'm talking about with the giants in Harfang. That's the set. First time read it through this year. And I would recommend you read them through with your family. If you're not sure that you should read them to your family, here's what I would do. Go on to YouTube and find Doug Wilson's lectures on the Chronicles of Narnia, okay? And give them a listen or watch them, okay? They're called the Lewis Lectures. You could do the same thing for the Space Trilogy, by the way. If you want to look up the Ransom Trilogy, by all means, do that if you need encouragement to read those. That's the sci-fi, sort of adult, more mature themed, not really a mature theme, but more mature books, certainly. But man, as I read the Chronicles of Narnia books, and we're starting to read through them again already, I really am like, wow, C.S. Lewis was really good with words. He done good. And so I would jump into some of the themes, but I don't necessarily want to spoil it for you. If you do want some of the themes, go listen to those lectures. He'll tell it to you. The last book, top books of the year is N.D. Wilson's Outlaws of Time. Once again, children's fiction. And really the book that changed my mind, I'll probably do a video on it sometime. I've got way too more ideas than I do time. Anyway, the book that changed my mind about reading fiction really was Tony Reinke's Lit, A Christian Guide to Reading. So I would tell you right now, if you have a problem with certain types of books, or if you want to look in sort of write off entire genres or something, stop the video, go buy the book, go read the book, then come back and finish the video. Okay, so welcome back. And so this is N.D. Wilson's Outlaws of Time series, and I really liked the story. Here's a little bit about the story, okay? This fellow right here, Sam Miracle, look at him, okay? He's got, something happens, and he ends up with snakes on his arms. And now that's not a spoiler, because, spoiler alert, that's on the cover, right? Okay, so I don't feel bad telling you that his arms become snake arms. That's weird and crazy. And there's time travel involved. There's loyalties are developed. Oh, one of my favorite characters. If you've read the series, you probably haven't. But if you do read the series, one of my favorite characters is Millie. Because she always wants to see that people are fed and taken care of. And she just loves feeding and taking care of people. What a great character she is. So, really, loyalties are discussed. Family loyalties are discussed. Friendship loyalties are discussed. And really, by discussed, I mean lived out, on display, flesh and blood in these characters. And so that's the Outlaws of Time, The Legend of Sam Miracle. The Last of the Lost Boys, that's actually the third one. And then The Song of Glory and Ghost. And for my favorites of these, it probably goes Legend of Sam Miracle, then The Song of Glory and Ghost, and The Last of the Lost Boys being the third. So that's it. I hope this was helpful to you. That's my top 5 books just to review. Ploductivity, The War of Art, Notes from a Tilt-a-whirl, The Chronicles of Narnia, and the Outlaws of Time trilogy. I think that's all I've got for you, and I wish you well.